Welcome back. It's your guy, Seth Garu Baxter with Maker's Bar, where we're creating 1 million leaders today for tomorrow. With us in Maker's Bar as we delve deeper into our ongoing series and connecting the people to the leadership as the bipartisan home for all elected officials and those who are interested in leadership. We have with us, and it's our great honor to host the Speaker of the House in Nevada, Speaker Steve Yeager. Steve Yeager, thank you so much for joining us today with Maker's Bar. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me, Seth. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you in Maker's Bar.
Thank you very much. And you're our first speaker, official speaker. We have had some assemblymen and representatives, but for me, it's actually a great pleasure and honor being a political interested person my whole life and passionate about the politics. I'm grateful for Maker's Bar for creating this opportunity for both of us.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. So, Speaker, would you mind giving us a little bit of your origin story? Where were you born, and a little bit about your upbringing?
Yeah, sure. So I was actually born in Minnesota and mostly grew up in Michigan. My dad ran department stores, so he was like transferred around a lot in the Midwest. And so grew up there, went to public high school in Michigan. And then when I was looking for college, I stayed in Michigan and went to the University of Michigan because we got in-state tuition. And that was really critical for me. I couldn't afford any of those bigger, more expensive schools. And so spent a good 4 years there and then decided I wasn't ready to be done with school. So I went to law school out at Cornell Law School in Ithaca, New York, which somehow was colder than where I grew up in Michigan. And yeah, when I got done there, I decided I was tired of cold weather and I made my way out west. So I had to stop in Phoenix for about 4 or 5 years working at a large law firm. And at the time I was playing a lot of poker, actually. This is back in 2004, 2005. So I was traveling to Las Vegas quite a bit on the weekends and ultimately decided to move to Las Vegas. So I moved to Las Vegas, Nevada in 2009, and I've sort of been there ever since. I did start out as a lawyer there. I was at a law firm, and I was at the public defender's office. And then I got involved in politics, not expecting that to happen, but, you know, the world can be crazy in that way. So I've been we're part-time legislature here. So I've been in elected office since 2016, but I also have a job as a personal injury lawyer that I kind of try to manage both of those at the same time. So that's kind of what I've been doing the last 6 or 7 years.
Fantastic. And if you don't mind, Speaker, would you please give a little insight, because some of our audience might not understand some of the details or duties of a Speaker of the House. Would you please give a little insight to that?
Yeah, so I kind of look at it this way. If your listeners or viewers are familiar with the federal government, there's a Speaker of the House in the federal government. You know, right now it's Speaker Johnson, but it was Nancy Pelosi. She was probably the most high-profile one. So the Speaker of the House here, essentially the 42 elected members of our state assembly choose a leader. They vote for a Speaker. So my job as Speaker really is to make sure that the assembly is functioning appropriately. I preside over the floor session. So I think a lot of people, you zoom out or you watch C-SPAN and you see a floor session where members are getting up and speaking. So I preside over that. And then, every state's different, but in Nevada, the Speaker actually has a lot of power. I determine who sits on various committees. I determine who the committee chairs are. I determine who the vice chairs are. And so, basically I'm responsible for being an elected official and running my own bills, but also managing the operations of the assembly, both the elected members, and then there's the whole staff side of it, right? We have staff, bill drafters, a legal department, constituent services. So I kind of oversee that along with the Senate Majority Leader, who's head of the other house. And so the two of us sort of co-manage that. So a lot of managerial responsibility, but I do still have my own bills. And so it's a lot to manage, but it's a really interesting and fun job.
In referencing some of your own bills, what are some of those that you'd like to share with us today that are really actually the number one in your heart, if you can start from there?
Yeah, there's so many of them. It's hard to pick one, right? It's like picking among your children. But the one that I'm really excited about, that I think some of your listeners will be excited about, is Assembly Bill 500, and that one actually creates a new type of bank in Nevada. And you say, well, why is that exciting? Well, let me tell you why it's exciting. So every time you use your credit card somewhere, there's this complex network behind the scenes, that processes the payment. And we're all using credit cards now, almost nobody using cash. So there's a lot of middlemen in that process, and they take money out of the transaction. So, if you're a small business, you've got to pay those fees. And sometimes, if you go to a store, they say, if you're going to use a credit card, we're going to charge you an additional 1%, 2%. I mean, that's to cover those fees. So this bank would be specifically a bank to process those transactions, because right now they're all the commercial banks that do it, but we would have like a Nevada charter bank that would be able to access the federal infrastructure. And what that means for consumers should be lower prices. So you're not going to see those signs that you have to cover the credit card transaction. And businesses, small businesses in particular, will keep more of that money in their pocket. And then as an aside, like the state of Nevada will actually make a little bit of money on that transaction too. So it's a way for us to bring some more money into the state. So that bill has a long way to go, but I think it has a chance to be transformational, because no state in the United States has done this before. There's some European models, but it really is groundbreaking, and I think could be a very exciting model and bring a lot of business to the state.
I got to tell you, it sounds extremely fascinating, because this is the first I'm hearing of it myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think one other state has tried it, but not successfully. But if you think about, I mean, just the way our economy works, but particularly in Las Vegas, all the credit card transactions that happen on the Las Vegas Strip every day, at casinos, at restaurants, at bars, at shows. I mean, that's all money that's leaving the state, and it's all going into the pockets of largely big banks who are processing those transactions. So I think we can do it smarter in the state. We can make a little bit of money on our own, and then we can keep that in-house. And it wouldn't be limited to Nevada. So, other folks could decide to tap into that network. So if you're a small business in New York, maybe you want to use the Nevada bank to process your transactions, and that should bring down your cost.
Absolutely. It sounds fascinating. Is there another one that's on the heels of that as one of your vitally important to you?
Well, something I really worked on over the years a lot. We work on a lot of important issues here, but it's really been a passion of mine to get kids outside. I grew up before we had the internet, really, before we had cell phones, before we had computers and tablets. And I think now, so much of what you do in the classroom is tablet based or on your phone. So I started a grant program a couple of years ago to help some lower income students get outside, because it's amazing how many students, even in Las Vegas, have never been out of their neighborhood. And we have these amazing parks here. So the bill I'm working on this time is to give some more money to that program. We gave that program $500,000 the last 2 years, and there were like $2 million worth of requests that came in from schools to get kids outside to parks, to get them on camping trips. And so that one is near and dear to my heart, because I've sort of seen the progression of, from when I first started in the legislature, almost every session I've done a piece of legislation to try to get kids outdoors. And, we know it's good for their mental health, and it actually makes them way more engaged in the classroom. When they go off site and do something and then come back to the classroom, they're more engaged or more likely to come to school. And it's just, frankly, it's just nice to get kids off of their devices, talking to each other out in nature. So, I'm hoping we can pass that bill, because there is definitely a need there. And when you speak to the students, they are transformed after these experiences. So it's really uplifting.
I remember as a kid, and dating myself a little, but that was one of the best parts of the day. And you did. I remember from 6th grade, 5th grade, and going out to the playground, and you came back into school. Not only were your friendships developing, but you felt like you had this release, and you were able to get back into classroom. And I think that is one of the components that's been missing a great deal.
Yeah, I think it is. Part of that is just education is very different now than it was probably when you and I were in school, right? There was less emphasis then on standardized tests and more emphasis on creativity and critical thinking. But so much of our education system now has been boiled down to, can you pass the standardized test? And that matters to some extent, but what really matters is people being, socialized, being able to talk with one another, to communicate, to negotiate disputes. And I think we lose a lot of that in the classroom. So getting kids outside, to me, it's a win-win. And Nevada is a wonderful state. We have everything from Southern Nevada, which you think it's the prototypical desert where it's 110 degrees in the summertime. But you go up to Northern Nevada, like we're here in Carson City, where the capital is, Reno, Lake Tahoe, you get tons of snow, there's tons of skiing, and there's everything in between. So the fact that students have never been out of their neighborhoods really breaks my heart. And it's a reason I've really tried to work on this issue since I got elected back in 2016.
Absolutely. And Nevada is such an interesting state, in particular to this last election. If you don't mind, share with some people, I think, where you would be able to speak to Nevada as a state, fill in the blanks.
It's a swing state. It really is. I mean, there are very few swing states left in the country, right? When we look at federal elections, you have red states, you have blue states, and you have a handful of purple states. And Nevada clearly is in that category. You know, a couple other ones: Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Arizona. But I think that's just a reflection of our population here. We are a majority state. You know, we're a very service-based economy down here in Las Vegas. So that means we have a lot of immigrants and immigrant workers, but we could really flip either way in elections. And, you know, I think that's a real benefit because no matter what elected office you're in, or no matter what you're running for in the state of Nevada, you got to work hard. You got to talk to people. Like, you can't take anything for granted. And on the national scene, it really does bring a lot of attention and resources into the state, right? We only have 6 electoral votes, but those 6 electoral votes could be the difference in an election. So we get visits from presidential candidates, we get visits from senators and House members. And, you know, we're a pretty small state when you think about it. We're only about 3 million people. So we really do punch above our weight class in that way. And I think it's just been a real blessing. And I think for those of us in elected office, I mean, what it tells us is, you know, a lot of our constituents are middle of the road. I mean, they're not hard right, they're not hard left. They just want a government that works for them. They want a government that sometimes gets out of the way. They want a government that gives them a hand up, not a hand out. And so you take that into consideration. But I think it's a wonderful, wonderful place to live. And it's every 4 years we just have a real battle for the White House, and it's exciting to be here during that time.
It always is. I tell you, it's one of my favorite parts is watching how Nevada is going to turn out and how some of the electorate are going to vote. It's always been fascinating to me as a political student myself. Now, Nevada as a state, some of the issues, well, seeing this last election, we'll start there. It seems to have caused a great deal more attention to issues I don't think that we were paying to for the individual states as well. And with this last election, has caused people to feel as if they want to get more involved, but they're not exactly sure on the state level, on the federal level. With Nevada, what are you seeing as the most pertinent issues that were shown a light upon this last election that draws your attention?
This last election, I think clearly the number one issue was the economy. The number one issue is almost always the economy when we get to presidential elections. You know, people were feeling the pinch. Things were more expensive. Inflation was high. And for me, like, my constituents would just kind of ask, like, what are you going to do to help these real world things, right? Why are things more expensive? How do I make ends meet? So that was a little bit newer. I mean, 2020 was a very different election. That was sort of in the midst of COVID, but there was a lot of relief money that came in. So I think the economy, and then I always call this the big 3. As long as I've been running for office in Nevada and probably everywhere else in the country, 3 big issues: housing, meaning is it affordable and can I get it? And if I'm a renter, can I stay in my place? Education, public education is a struggle here, and I think it's a struggle in a lot of places. And then healthcare access, healthcare coverage. You know, we have shortages of every single provider you can imagine here in the state, and I know a lot of other folks do as well. And then when you are able to find somebody, can you afford it, right? Can I afford to pay for prescription drugs? Why are my copays so high? Why is health insurance so high? So those are the 3 issues that, you know, continue to be at the forefront. And then the economy was really layered in a way, I think, in 2024 that, you know, I think we anticipated, but not everyone did. I mean, you know, it was a big concern for folks who, you know, they just feel stretched further and further, right? Their wages aren't going up, but prices are going up, and they're having to try to make ends meet. And so I heard that loud and clear at the doors. It's like, what are you going to try to do to help us in that regard?
So share with us some of your ideas on how we should be looking at healthcare and trying to fix it. What are some of your ideas?
Yeah, I mean, healthcare, number one, I think, is prescription drug pricing is really sort of out of control, and it's really hard and complicated to understand. I mean, we could spend 3 hours talking about prescription drug pricing, and I don't know that either of us would walk away from the conversation feeling like we really understood it. But much like the banking thing I talked about, there are a lot of middlemen who take money out of the process and don't have to. So, you know, we're working on legislation to cap the cost of certain prescription drugs, life-saving medications, insulin. I mean, that's an important one, right? And drug manufacturers can basically charge whatever they want, and that's not fair. I mean, we should never be in a situation where someone is deciding, am I going to eat this week, or am I going to buy my medication? But that's a reality, you know, of where we are. And then beyond that, I think just getting more providers into the state. So we've done a lot of good work on compacts. You know, if you're licensed in another state, you don't have a criminal background, you've done pretty well. Like, we should make it easy for you to come here if you want to. A lot of people do want to come to Nevada. We're a low tax state. The weather is good. Until recently, housing was very affordable, but licensing is an obstacle, right? If you've got to go take the test again and go to school and all that. So that, and then I think just expanding our state healthcare. I mean, we have state Medicaid like everybody else, but making sure that we're covering folks and we're doing more preventative care, because we know if you have to go to the hospital, that's going to be way more expensive than going to the doctor on a regular basis and getting checkups. So I think in the healthcare space, those are a couple of things we've done. And then I think the last one I'll mention, I have a bill for pricing transparency. When you go to the hospital for a procedure, you really have no idea how much you're going to pay for that procedure, because it depends on what insurance you have, or if you're uninsured, or if you're going to pay cash. So this is already federal law, but not everyone is following it. We're going to make hospitals actually post the list of the prices of the 50 most popular procedures that happen at hospitals, and they're going to be on the website. So you can go shop. If you've got to get whatever procedure it is, you can look at all the hospitals and say, what do they charge? And, sometimes if you pay cash, it's cheaper than if you use your insurance, which is crazy. Like, that system makes no sense. But I think that sort of transparency helps consumers make good decisions, and it helps them save money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So putting a cap on the state programs, and was I understand that correctly?
Yeah, it would be basically we're looking at starting pretty small, 10 or 20 of the most critical life-saving medications, basically putting a cap on them that you go to the pharmacy, you're going to know exactly what the maximum amount is. So, you hear these stories. Remember these stories a few years ago where people were getting EpiPens and they were charging them like thousands of dollars? And immediately, like, why? It doesn't cost that much to manufacture it, but we just don't have controls here in the state. So that's an extreme example, but we just want to put those caps in to say, look, we understand you're a pharmaceutical company, like, you're entitled to make some money, but not at the cost of people's lives. So we've got to have some level of reasonableness here. So I will tell you, we passed that bill in our last legislative session, and unfortunately the governor vetoed it, and he has a right to do that. So it did not get enacted into law, but we're back trying it again because we think it's a good policy. It's going to save lives and it's going to save money.
Fantastic. And then in education, you mentioned education as one of your other vehicles
of
interest.
Yeah, I think about it. I think back. I went to public school, and I remember how critical it was to, I had one teacher who really, really believed in me, right, and really instilled in me a passion for learning. And so, number one here, we just don't have enough teachers. We have long-term vacancies in classrooms, where we have long-term substitute teachers. So the last legislative session, we actually put $250 million up specifically for teacher raises. And that was to get more teachers in the classroom. Most teachers got about a 20% raise. That's not enough. They deserve like 100 or 200% raise, but it has helped us fill some of those positions. I have some legislation this session that will give some additional money to hard to fill positions, because if you're a teacher, you're deciding where you're going to teach. There's some schools that are more attractive, and they tend to be the schools with more resources. So if you're going to, teach in a lower income area, there would be a stipend there. Because I think that is the number one thing. If we can get a qualified teacher in every classroom, that is going to make the difference for students. And then I think beyond that, we just, really focused last session on putting more money into public education. There's a whole ranking of how much money states put in to public education, and Nevada's like in the bottom 5. And that's not a good place for us to be. I mean, we can't expect results if we're not willing to invest. And, I just say the last thing on that is sometimes I hear the criticism, well, you're just throwing money at the problem. That's not going to solve it. We've never thrown money at the problem here in Nevada. We haven't. And we put some accountability measures in too, right? We're making the school districts come before us and talk about how they're spending the money. How many teachers did you get? And show us how that is increasing student achievement. And, I don't expect it to turn overnight, right? The Titanic takes a long time to make a 180-degree turn, but it takes a consistent commitment to education. And so those are some of the programs, that we've enacted, but I really can't oversell how important it is to have a qualified teacher in the classroom, because if that teacher inspires a student to learn and to want to do better, like, that's going to change the course of their life. Like, I know it did for me, and I know it will for a lot of students here in Nevada.
I'm very curious. I don't know exact writings, and forgive me, Nevada's ranking as far as the high school graduation rate. Where does that measure?
Yeah, we're towards the bottom on that too. I mean, Nevada historically has been a pretty low tax state. That's why a lot of people come here. We don't have a state income tax. Our real estate tax is really low, but as a result of that, we haven't been able to invest in the way that we would like to. And then, we talked about Nevada's population earlier. might be interested to know that in the Clark County School District, which is the Las Vegas area, that is the 5th largest school district in the country, and over 80 languages are spoken because you have a lot of immigrants who are coming, and students, they're starting out not speaking English, and it's not just 1 or 2 different languages, it's 80 different languages. So, we have a lot of work to do there to improve that graduation rate, but I think it starts with investment and it starts with qualified teachers.
So the investment is in increasing teacher salaries, and then the other portion of the money is to, pardon me, improving the schools aesthetically and or updating them, or
well, so the way we have here, it's a per pupil funding. So basically, we come up with the amount of money, and then you divide it by the number of kids, and that money follows the student into the classroom. So we increase that. We increased our per pupil funding more than any other state as a percentage basis in the last 2 years. So it just means more resources, right? More after school programs, more tutoring, more literacy. So that sort of investment. And then we do have the infrastructure need. I'm sure a lot of communities have this, right? We just have aging buildings. And so trying to figure out how can you build these schools. We haven't invested as much in that as we should, but we've prioritized the teacher pay, filling the hard to fill classrooms, and then making sure that the students just have more money following them so they can get a better education and better support. And I'd say along with that, mental health support, that's been a huge issue, especially after COVID, right? When a lot of students were not in school. And so we've been slow to recover from the learning loss in COVID. So having those supports around students to be able to identify some of those issues early, I think is really, really important and well worth the investment.
Now, does some of this money follow them upon graduation into secondary education, whether it be vocation and or trade school or university?
So the money we invest in the K through 12 education system doesn't follow them, but we do have some good programs here. We have the Millennium Scholarship here. So if you're a student in Nevada and you maintain a certain grade level, like you basically can go to a state university tuition free. So we really incentivize folks to want to stay here. And we're trying to keep our universities affordable too. I think that's been a problem all around the country. You see, someone was telling me the other day, I have a friend who has a daughter going to Yale, and they said the tuition is like $85,000 a year.
Oh,
that doesn't even include the living expenses. So, that's insane, right? That's basically like a house.
Oh my gosh, right?
So we've tried to resource, our folks and have them stay here. So, just trying to improve that system. I think for a long time, there was just kind of a culture of, good enough is good enough. And, that's not why I ran for office. I ran for office to try to make things better for my constituents. And I think, starting with the public education system is huge because almost everybody goes through that. And, if you're able to kind of put someone on a good course early on, just way more likely to be successful in life.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned housing, affordable housing. What are your interests there pointing toward?
Yeah, so housing has been a little tricky here because, for a long time, we had very affordable housing in Nevada, and this both Southern Nevada and Northern Nevada. But what started happening is we had a lot of California folks who couldn't afford to live in Los Angeles. Yeah, so our biggest importer of people is obviously from California because they're our neighbor. But that did start to drive up housing costs a bit, right? And just the population growth here, it's been tremendous. So there's been a squeeze in the market, and a couple different things. Number one, we saw rental prices just going through the roof, right? People were not able to afford rental increases. So some of the policies we've worked on are if you are on a fixed income, so if you're disabled or you're a senior, that there's a rent cap, that your rent can't increase more than 5 or 10% year over year, because we were seeing people like they can't absorb that. They're on a fixed income, right? And so they were ending up out on the streets. And then I think on the rental front as well, there's been some really bad media lately about some landlords here, big corporate landlords, either coming in, buying up properties, and then having all kinds of hidden fees. So you sign a lease and you think your payment's $1,000, but lo and behold, you get your first bill and it's $1,300 because they didn't tell you about this fee or that fee. So cracking down on that sort of thing in legislation, that's one of the things we've been working on. And then just trying to get more housing built. We don't have enough housing, and we certainly don't have enough housing for low income and middle income, which is most of our workforce down here in Southern Nevada. So how can we use state money to leverage some of those federal dollars? The difficulty with that is you can start a project today, but it takes time to build. So I wish some of these decisions had been made 20 years ago, but we're trying to play catch up a little bit there. And then just trying to limit the amount of corporate landlords, because what we're seeing is like houses get built and out of state companies come and buy them, and they don't live here. They're not attuned to the market, and they're just charging a lot of money, making a lot of profit, and pricing people out of the market. So that's been a real challenge for us, the workforce housing. Of course, doing things like giving teachers a 20% pay raise helps them afford housing. So these things are all kind of interconnected. And I'll say we're not the only state dealing with housing issues. Almost every state is dealing with that right now, where they just haven't built enough or dense enough to be able to accommodate the population.
Yeah, it's been a real challenge. And that's one of the things I've noticed since this last election as well, which brings me to my other point. The divisive nature of which I see that has been a result of this last election calls for those of us who are looking to leaders and or each other to work a little harder at unifying and finding ways to connect and really build a bridge of connection again. Do you have any insight to how you can see where we, with the separation of the parties and the way people are so dedicated to each of their sides, are there ways you see that the Democrats and Republicans are finding or looking toward to help build that gap and to reestablish that connection?
Yeah, I feel like if I had a great answer to your question, I'd probably be a billionaire at this point. I mean, everyone sees the problem, right? The problem is polarization. The problem is never more so than now have we identified ourselves by political party. Political party used to be something that was sort of on the side, right? You were a brother, a father, a husband, you were a community member, and then by the way, you were a Democrat or a Republican. But our identity as people is really broken down on political party lines. And, this is intentional. I mean, the information age we live in, the way that things are advertised to us, social media. I mean, this phenomenon. You read one article, and next thing you know, your feed is all those same kind of articles. Yes. Because they know you better than you know yourself. And the result of that is we've been really siloed, right? We get these opinions in our head, and then we just get fed the same information and the friend recommendations of the same sort of people. And so the question is, how do you break that, right? And it's a struggle for attention really more than anything else, because we have a limited amount of attention, and everyone is clawing for your attention no matter who you are today. You think about, you go on Instagram, and somehow they know the last 75 purchases are things you looked at on the internet. So, the best thing I can recommend and what I've tried to do is just talk to people. I mean, you have to talk to people. You cannot make assumptions about people based on what they look like, even based on their political party. I mean, I think back to, 15, 20 years ago, maybe longer than that, really before cell phones were a thing. Do you remember you used to stand in the grocery store and you would stand in line and there was nothing to do but look at the magazines, or you just start talking to the person in front of you. Hey, how's your day going? We've lost that, right? We now have our individualized entertainment just fed to us at all times. And I think it's made us very isolated, and it's made us less likely to understand each other. So, I just think the best thing you do is rekindle those conversations. Like if I'm at the airport and I'm waiting for my flight, sure, I can be on my phone. I can be watching something. You know what I try to do? I try to go sit up at the bar and just talk to somebody. Talk to somebody else who's sitting there. And you know what I realize? Like a lot of times I don't have much in common with those people politically, right? Like, I never bring up that I'm in politics, but I'll just say, where are you flying? Do you have a good time in Vegas? Tell me about you. And I think we can just get back to that kind of a connection, that it's okay to have differences, but it's hard. I mean, we really have been segmented in a way that we never have been before. I think in the political spectrum, I'll just do a plug for Nevada. We're a small legislature, and people think, oh, you guys are like Washington, D.C., Republicans and Democrats fight. We hardly ever fight in this building. I have great conversations with Republicans, with Democrats, and we try to work on stuff together. But so I would say just don't make assumptions, right? I mean, we have to work at this as a population. And if you're not having conversations and willing to hear somebody out and sometimes willing to disagree, like we're going to lose that entirely. And maybe get off of social media every once in a while, because like it's not real sometimes, right? It's like a very artificial construct around you. And so that's fed into my wanting to get kids outside as well, right? You don't want them scrolling Absolutely. All day long and just being fed like videos. And, these advertisers are so good now. They are so good at being able to give you exactly what you want and knowing what you want before you even know it. I think that's a little bit scary, and we really ought to get back to just getting to know one another as people.
I couldn't agree more, because I like you, I did grow up in a time where my dad felt that he always said, you meet no strangers, even if they have different political ideologies than you. and you might have differences of opinion on how they solve or where you choose to put them, but all of us are still the same. We want the same things in that sense, and I've lived by that, and I find that very much one of the things that this election has definitely shown more of that. The bright light of how divided we are as opposed to the commonalities. But I will say, I also have noticed that there is a growing trend on the desire to connect, and people are looking to connect. And one of the things that I've been noticing, and I wonder if you're seeing the same, is they're trying to talk more to local politicians and local government. And I think that's a big part of where some of this healing of communication is going to come into hand. Would you agree with that on the local level?
I agree with that entirely, and let me say thank you for making the effort too, because this really is it's easier to isolate sometimes, right? It's easier to not confront things that make us uncomfortable. But I think local government is where it's at. Washington D.C. and federal politics, there's a long history there, and I don't think anyone has a lot of confidence in what they're doing. But on the state level, we really do accomplish a lot here, and some of the best ideas that I have, they just come from everyday people who reach out to me and they say, hey, why do we do things this way? And I say, yeah, I don't know. Let me look into that. So I've had a lot of legislation I've worked on where it's just come from a constituent wanting to solve a problem. And we can bring them into the process. You can come and testify on the bill. You can help present the bill. And hopefully if it gets signed, we take you over to the governor's office. You get a signed copy of the bill. Like, this is accessible and more at people's fingertips than they think. And I'll tell you, as a state elected official, like, I need help. It's really busy. Like, a lot of work to do. So, if folks really want to get in there and get their hands dirty, I'd say, try to find a local person, whether it's a state legislator, a city council person, a county commission, a school board. Just reach out and ask how you can help, or ask if you can volunteer on a campaign. I think what you're going to see is, like, what you see on TV and the way people are sort of divided is not really what's happening out there. Most folks who are in local elected office, we're not doing it to get rich. We're not doing it to get famous. Like, we just want to solve problems and make our community better. And I think when you get involved in that, it gives you a level of inspiration and confidence in the system that you wouldn't otherwise have, because you're being told all day how everything's broken, everything's terrible, we all hate each other. And, every time you're being told that, somebody's gaining from that, somebody's profiting from that. But if you can sort of look beyond that and just figure out how you can help, and I think if folks do that, they're going to find that they like what they see. And probably a lot of them are going to want to run for public office, because you really do have the opportunity to do some good things.
And talking about volunteering and reaching out and helping, would you mind listing a couple of different ways that some people might not know they're able to volunteer to be of assistance? There, we hear some of the typical ones: get people out registered to vote. But are there some other areas that people can get involved with? For example, the local legislatures, et cetera, where they can volunteer their time to be a part of the process?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different opportunities. If there's a particular candidate you really believe in, there's a lot you can do on the election side. I mean, that can range from knocking on doors to, helping with digital social media. I know I said social media is bad, but like, we still got to do it, right? If you're not a people person, you want to stuff envelopes or you want to help write letters, you can do that. And then I think on the elected side it's very different. I have people all the time that say, hey, can I just come up and spend a day with you at the legislature? I say, sure, yeah, come up and see what it's about. Or can I intern for you? So I think on the individual side, if you have a candidate you believe in or an elected you believe in, if you reach out and offer to help, probably going to say yes. But I think beyond that, you can volunteer with a political party. Or if you don't like a party, I mean, there are a million different advocacy groups, right? We have a housing and justice coalition. We have a, families of incarcerated people. There is an interest group for everybody out there. So if you figure out what your passion is, I think there's plenty of ways to get involved. And, I'd say beyond that, even if it's not in the political world, one thing I always recommend is just go do some community service. Go find an organization, go volunteer at a food pantry, go volunteer at Habitat for Humanity, because number one, you're going to do some good stuff. Number two, you're going to meet some really interesting, good people. And I think, developing that network of people that you really know in person, not the ones that are your Facebook friends or your Instagram followers or your TikTok friends, like the real people out there, they're going to open up a lot of doors for you. I mean, for me, I never thought I'd get involved in politics. And someone just said, hey, have you ever thought about running for office? And I said, no, why would I think about running for office? Oh, you think you'd be good at it? And I said, well, let me look into that. And I mean, that sort of started the process for me. So I think there are probably a lot of really talented folks out there who have never seen themselves in this role, but we need good people people, smart people, hard workers. So just be curious and get interested. And by the way, if you volunteer for something and you don't like it, you don't have to keep doing it. You can say, hey, I'm done here. I want to go try something else.
Speaking on that as well, or kind of switching gears, nationally, what are the issues that are primary of concern to you nationally that you think this administration should be paying attention to, that you'd like to see drawn some light upon?
Yeah, it's an interesting time to ask that question because it's probably very different now than even would have been a month ago. I mean, my primary concern right now is just, the global economy, right? Like what we are seeing is, and there are intentional choices being made at the federal level, such as tariffs, such as, cutting federal budget, that are having real implications on the states. Every single state relies on federal funding. In Nevada, it's about 30% of our budget is federal funding. I think I read in Louisiana, I think, or Mississippi, it's like 70% of their budget is federal money. So, the cuts to programming are of utmost importance. But I also think this sort of trade war and tariffs that are happening, they're having a huge impact on the states because, when I talk about building housing, if you're instituting tariffs and they're raising the cost of all the raw materials, like those projects aren't going to get built. There's a lot of uncertainty right now in what is happening with the economy. And, anyone who has a retirement account and has looked at it lately, there's horrified, right? There's been massive losses in the stock market. And so that turmoil and instability, I would like to see that go away because it's really hard to be a state legislator and try to budget with that uncertainty. For a state like Nevada, we rely so much on tourism. And our tourism numbers are really down the last couple months for a couple of reasons. Number one, people don't feel like they have the income to go on vacation right now because things are really unsettling. And then, this is my opinion, but our federal government somehow has kind of poked both Canada and Mexico in the eye. And those are our biggest visitors to Las Vegas, especially Canadians. They love coming here, spending money. And we're seeing that visitation go down. So I would like to see some kind of any sort of like coherent strategy from the federal administration about what is America's posture going to be when it comes to trading and when it comes to being an ally. I mean, some of our traditional allies in Europe and, where we've really been a peacekeeper and peacemaker in the world, those seem to be falling apart a little bit. And so, I'd like to see them focus on that and just get back to like helping the American people, right? Like we're off sort of arguing with Canada and Mexico and Europe, but like people are really, really needing help and the economy is tough right now. So, I think they should be focusing on that, just some sort of stability, not just for states, but for everyone who has to live in this world. Like to be pushed and pulled every single day by what's going on. Number one, it's stressful mentally, but it doesn't, you can't plan for the future. You don't know what the future is going to bring without that lack of predictability.
And then on crime nationally, what are your thoughts on crime nationally?
Yeah, I mean, crime is important and public safety is important, right? I mean, you got to feel safe in where you are. So, as a state, we've really invested a lot in our law enforcement. And I think, making sure that law enforcement are community partners, it's not necessarily just about arresting people and incarcerating people. Some people need to be arrested and some need to be incarcerated. But do we have the right kind of social supports, right? Substance abuse continues to be a huge issue in the country, and especially with the fentanyl crisis. Do we have enough support? When law enforcement encounters somebody and they're in a mental health crisis, what are their options? If their only option is to arrest, that's probably not going to turn out well. Do they have an option to take somebody to treatment? So, number one, I think making sure that the resources are there. And then I think focusing on the appropriate crimes, right? I mean, we should be focusing on violent people who are out trying to victimize the community. Not to say we should ignore everything else, but I think a lot of the other social ills play into that, right? If we can get people good education, good job prospects, get them off of drugs, get a good public education system, you're going to see a lot of that kind of fall away. But, it's an important issue, right? I mean, if people don't feel safe, no matter what's going on, if they don't feel safe, they're not going to want to go out. They're not going to want to spend money. So, I think that kind of emphasis on the federal level is important, but I think we need to think a little bit outside the box. The arrest and incarcerate model doesn't necessarily change anybody. And if the whole point is to change behaviors, we have to act in a way that actually gives people resources to change those behaviors. Because I really do believe most people don't want to be involved in a life of crime. They end up there for various reasons, but we've got to give them, again, a hand up, not a hand out, to try to help them get back into society.
I think that's a very interesting thing to look at crime nationally these days, because I don't know that anyone really feels there's a handle on it, and I'm not sure they. I think the only words I continue to hear is we don't know what's happening with it, and so the concern is we just want someone to get a handle on it. Is what
Yeah,
some.
and we spoke about this earlier. A lot of this is, it's what the media decides to cover, right? And I mean,
Yes.
let's be honest about it. As a people, we just we look for dramatic things, right? I say when you're driving down the street, you don't look at the other lane of traffic unless there's an accident, and then you look over there because you want to see what's going on. So as long as media is going to be dependent upon views and clicks and likes to be able to make money advertising, they're going to continue to highlight things like, crimes, other sort of activities. And so sometimes you just have to have a little bit more of a perspective of like what's really happening out there. So, I always say, figure out in your community. You can go to your local police department, ask them, hey, how is crime here? Are things up or things down? Because they're going to have the information. They have to give all that information to the federal government. And so don't necessarily assume what you're reading and hearing in the media is the truth. But that being said, we've got to make sure when you call 911 and you have an emergency, you're going to need an officer that's going to come out there. You can't wait 15, 20, 30 minutes. We've got to make sure we have the resources so people are actually safe when they're threatened.
Are you a bit concerned with some of the gun control issues that are currently in conflict, whether or not more legislation is needed and or looser legislation is needed?
Yeah, I mean, gun legislation on the federal level is almost non-existent. They did pass one a while back, but I think on the state level, like we've tried to really, enact sensible policies. I mean, I'm certainly concerned about gun violence in this country. I mean, I don't think anyone can look around the world and really explain why we have so much gun violence here, and especially, these mass shootings. It's just like other countries don't have that, right? They might have one a decade. And we have like one a week, it seems like, in this country. And, I read recently that the number one cause of death of kids under 18 is now gun violence. I mean, that should be, that is crazy, right? And so
it really is.
There are some things that we can do. We've tried a bill here to say, look, you shouldn't have a certain type of weapon until you're 21. These high capacity weapons that tend to be used at mass shootings. It's not that you can't have them, but maybe we just wait till you're 21 to have that, right? I mean, we have a 21 age on drinking, right? And I think probably, possessing some of those weapons are more dangerous. And things like, making sure that we don't have guns in polling places here, because, with politics the way it is now, that's a recipe for disaster. And, we've enacted universal background checks. So it doesn't matter who you're buying the gun from, if it's a private sale, if it's a public sale, you got to get a background check. Like, isn't that the whole point of the background system, right? Like, you go in the system if you're not supposed to buy a gun, but then a lot of states still have these loopholes where if you buy a gun from your neighbor or go to a gun show, they don't even do the background check on you. And so, I think Nevada's been a little bit of a model of that, but it's really going to be up to the states. I don't think the federal government really has the votes or the political will to do anything when it comes to guns. But, I live in a suburban part of Las Vegas, and that's one of the number one concerns I hear, right? Because they're still doing like lockdown drills where students are hiding under their desks. And it's like, that's not going to help somebody learn.
Absolutely.
So, I think you just got to focus on the state. And, I know I'm stating the obvious, but it's going to depend a lot on the composition of your state legislature, whether you can get some of that enacted. Some of those bills I talked about to you, we've been able to get enacted, like the universal background checks, but the limitation on what kind of guns you can purchase and, no guns in polling places. We tried those and the governor vetoed them last legislative session, but, we think they're good policy and we'll keep trying. I'm never going to find it acceptable that gun violence is the number one cause of death for kids under the age of 18. I'm never going to find it acceptable that we have these mass shootings. And, the fact is you get an alert on your phone now and it's like, you don't even look at it because you get one every single week.
Isn't that crazy?
We just cannot normalize that as a society. And I think we can't just say, well, this person had a mental health issue. Even if that's true, what are we doing about it? I mean, doing nothing is not the answer. I know these things are hard. People get really emotional on both sides of this issue. But if we can't do something like protect kids under the age of 18 from gun violence, we're not doing anything right as a society.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I would completely agree. Now, I've been hearing a number of the different networks talk about rising stars in the parties. Who are the next rising stars, so to speak? Now, to me, you would be one of them because I've been getting
Thank you.
familiar with you. Absolutely. Well, you're young enough, and dare I even say, you're handsome enough. You got the charisma. You get so.
I think my mom's been feeding you my PR lines.
I won't. I told her I wasn't going to tell. So I'm curious, who do you see, if there are some that are standing out to you as far as some of the next people to be on the lookout for on either side of the party or outside of the parties?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, thankfully I've had a chance to meet a lot of these folks because, a lot of them ran for president in 2020, the 2020 primary on the Democratic side in particular. So they all came to Nevada. I've been really impressed by, on the Democratic side, Pete Buttigieg. I mean, he knows his stuff. He's well prepared. I mean, you watch an interview, he always knows what he's talking about. I think he's really engaging. I've had a chance to meet Governor Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan, where I grew up. I mean, just a common sense, but also no nonsense person who really gets things done. I think she speaks to a lot of working class folks in a way that sometimes people in the party don't. I've had a chance to meet J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, really engaging guy, courageous, willing to make tough decisions. And then I think you have a lot of like sort of young guns who are coming up. A lot of them are, transitioning from attorney general to governor. I think about Wes Moore from Maryland, Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. So
Two,
I
yeah.
mean, I think there's just a lot of opportunity out there. I don't know where the party is going to go, but we have the talent. We have people that know how to communicate, and we have people that know where our constituents are and what matters to them. But, I'll go back to what I said at one of the beginning parts of this interview. This world has become all about attention, and how do you get people's attention? Because you can have the best message in the world, but if nobody hears it, it's not going to matter. So, we're in a world where that attention is very, very scarce. And so, I think whoever can figure out how to connect with voters, and particularly younger voters, in a way that hasn't happened yet is really, the sky is the limit. But those are some of the people, that I respect the most in the party. And, I had a chance to meet Kamala Harris when she ran, and I thought she would have made a fantastic president. I still believe that. I don't know what her future holds. A lot of people are speculating she's going to run for governor of California.
That's
I'm
it's
not
looking
sure
like
about
that.
that. Tim Walz, I'm a Minnesota guy. I was born there, so a lot to like about him. Very down to earth. So we have a lot of talent out there on the Democratic side. And I mentioned the Democratic side because I'm a Democrat, and obviously going into the 2028 election cycle, which, seems crazy. It's 3 years away, but we're already talking about it. But, I think there's going to be a robust, spirited primary on the Democratic side, and I'm looking forward to that. I think the more voices out there, the better off we're going to be.
Talking about the party and its direction, do you have a little thought on where you think the Democratic Party should be heading? What direction? Is it really more about focusing on getting more young people involved, or is it an issue related thing as far as?
I just think, we have to, any political party to be successful needs to focus on those kitchen table bread and butter issues. So when I went back to the economy, I mean, people really want to know, what are you going to do for them? How are you going to make their life better? And, that comes down to things like cost of groceries, cost of school, cost of gas. I mean, a lot of this is pocketbook issues. And, I think to some extent over the past couple decades, both parties have gotten away from that at times, right? They've been more interested, I think, in just, sort of talking more to like the elite level of society and not the people who are actually working and doing the job day to day. And so, I think that has to be a focus. Political party, as divided as we are between Democrat and Republicans, the biggest block right now are nonpartisans or non-affiliated voters. There are a lot of people that are dissatisfied with both political parties. And whichever party can grab that sort of demographic and speak to them in a way that's compelling, like they're going to win elections, right? Because you can't win with Democrats alone or Republicans alone. You need the nonpartisans and non-affiliated. So I think that's important. And then, just as a function of the world, we're seeing people, age out of politics, and young people come up and they become the next generation. And I think the challenges facing young people today are very unique and very different than they've ever been before. They're living in an extraordinarily complex world where they're getting bombarded all the time. You're not competing against the guy down the street for the job. Now you're competing against every person in every country in the world for your job. So, there's some real issues there that I think have to be solved. And I think, a recognition that what might have worked even 4 years ago in the campaign world is not going to work in 2028. People want to feel respected, valued, listened to. And so I know we have the talent to do that. How that's going to shake out, I'm not sure, but I'm looking forward to it because I know in 2028 we're going to get all those candidates visiting Nevada again, just like they have before. And I look forward to connecting with all them and figuring out who's going to rise to the top.
Absolutely. And then if you could have dinner or drinks with a leader, elected or not elected, but a leader in particular, alive or dead, name that one person.
There's a lot of them, and I'm not gonna like cop out and give you 10 people because that's not what
you can do 2 people if need be.
I'll give you 2, and maybe one is sort of obvious. I think Abraham Lincoln would be fascinating. He was the president when we became a state. He signed the charter making Nevada a state, and I just think I think the more I read about him, the more intrigued I am because he was like sort of the unexpected leader. But he also had a lot of mental health and depression issues, which must have been really hard in the 1860s, right? Because there weren't treatment for that.
Good point.
So I think him, and then I think maybe the most fascinating person I maybe have ever read about is Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, that guy was just, he's led such an extraordinary life. I mean, he's a president, and then he's like leading troops into Cuba for the Spanish-American War, and he's sort of like a frontier guy. And I get the sense, more I read about him, like he also was kind of a reluctant leader. Like he sort of had a lot of other things he wanted to do in life, but felt called into leading in service and politics. But I'm not sure that it was his first love. And so I think he's a really fascinating person to figure out, like, how did he address that kind of inner conflict of, I think I need to be doing this because it's the right thing for me to do, but I don't want to be doing it because I want to be out hunting on my ranch, or I want to be out, just doing what he did. Like, he's just such a fascinating guy. So I think those two would probably be my best. I read a book recently. I don't remember the name of it. I can tell you later, but it's a leadership book, and it was all about Teddy Roosevelt. And just
it might be the same book I was thinking of, because I remember reading a book not too long about him, which gave me this passion.
Very little, like this much of it was about his time as president. The whole thing was the lead up of like his life getting to that point. And I just thought it was really, really instructive and fascinating. So those would probably be my 2.
Those are 2 of mine for sure. And as I was mentioning, I remember reading this book, and it was a small portion about his time in office, but his life was so expansive and so interesting. The guy was a fascinating, not that Abraham Lincoln wasn't, because he's up there for me as well, but Teddy Roosevelt, I don't know that a lot of people knew some of the nuances that made him such an interesting person.
No, think about if he were president today, we would know all that stuff, right? Now you know everything you ever wanted to know about everybody, but back then there's still some mystery involved. And I'm really thankful that someone took the time to research and write that book, because I just got a really different impression of him than what I had.
Oh, same here. Okay, here's some fun speed round questions.
Okay.
The favorite food you like to eat when you are relaxing? Your most favorite food when you're relaxing, what is it?
Ooh, I love Asian food of any kind. So sushi, Korean barbecue, Chinese. So that's sort of like my comfort food is that. We have a great Chinatown in Las Vegas with all kinds of like Asian food that you'd ever want, and we don't have that in Carson City. So when I go back down to Vegas on the weekends, my wife will tell you I'm always like, let's go to Korean place, let's go to Japanese place.
So Asian food. Okay, favorite thing to drink. Now it can be spirited or not, but your favorite drink.
I've become a big fan of the old fashioned. I know it was like
of late, right?
Yeah,
something lately.
It's a fantastic drink, and we have I'll give a plug. We have a really great distillery in Fallon, Nevada, which is about an hour away from anywhere, and it's called Frey Ranch, Frey. They make some of the best bourbon in the country. So I use that for my old fashions, and they're exporting to most of, I think maybe half the states now. So you may be able to find it in your local grocery store. But yeah, a great old fashioned, a big, huge ice cube, relaxing at the end of the day. That's my number one choice.
I got to tell you, it's so funny you mention it. It's just in the last few months and going out for some business luncheons and dinners, I've just grown this real fondness for that. It's so funny you mentioned that, of a great old fashioned. And this one place we went for dinner, delicious.
You come out here and I'll make you a famous Frey Ranch old fashioned.
I will keep you to that word. Okay, your favorite book of all time that you read?
Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. such an interesting book, just so chock full of irony. I love the writing in the book. I probably read that book once a year. I don't know if it has any leadership lessons, but I just really like it. It's really entertaining, and it's an irony, like the ability to write in sort of these very ironic terms. I love that book, so that's my go-to.
And if you were ready to get down and funky and dancing and grooving or rocking out, what song comes to mind first?
That's funny. Yeah. Well, I'm a very bad dancer, just so you know. So
I am too, but
I'd probably say one of those like classics, like YMCA or something, like, the one that like there's a dance associated with it, so I don't have to actively get out there and freestyle. So I kind of think of like, the wedding. When you go to weddings, like, at the end of the night when they start playing all the super popular stuff from from the 60s, 70s, or 80s. So that would probably be my go-to. Although I'll tell you, I don't know all the, like, some of these songs, they have like elaborate dances that you do to them.
Oh,
like, come on, everyone's doing this. Like, I don't know what this stuff is. Like, YMCA is nice because it's like 4 things you do and that's it.
And see, I learned that because I worked with the YMCA for years, and so I had to learn how to do that. So that was funny that you said that. And then if you were going to give a piece of advice to your younger self at 13 years old, what would that be?
Don't stress the small stuff. And almost everything is the small stuff. I mean, that really would be the advice. I mean, we just get caught up sometimes in these little things, and we can just it will just nag at you, and you just have to let it go and realize that doesn't matter how good you are, there are going to be setbacks along the way. You just got to keep focused, keep being a good person, keep trying, and you're going to get there. So yeah, I would say loosen up and lighten up a little bit would be my advice.
That's a perfect piece of advice. And then last but not least, if you had to think of a comedian that makes you laugh till your gut hurts, who would that be?
Robin Williams. I love Robin Williams. Yeah, I mean, obviously he's not with us anymore, but man, his ability to just be funny when he's telling you jokes, but also to have that like performance comedy. I mean, just a really rare talent. But I will tell you, I love comedy of all kinds. I think laughter really is the elixir of life, and it's a great medicine. So, but if I could go see Robin Williams in person, I didn't get a chance to do that before he passed away, and that's a regret. He was just a really talented individual.
Oh, I have to agree completely. He was one of my all-time favorite as well. Just hilarious and genius in dramatic roles as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just genius in dramatic roles as well. Well, I must tell you, Speaker Yeager, it has completely been an honor and a true pleasure having you here speaking with our Maker's Bar audience. And I can't even tell you how much I'm looking forward to coming down there, holding you to that old fashioned.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And how much of a pleasure it has been speaking with you. And this is what we're hoping to do, provide an avenue for them to get to know who Representative Yeager is and the fact that you're one of our leaders. And we completely appreciate the time that you took out to speak with us today and be here with us today.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. And if you come down, I'll promise you one old fashioned, but the truth is we'll probably have 2 or 3 of them. But that's kind of
Oh yeah. Now, if the people wanted to get in contact with you, Representative Yeager, is there a specific place if someone wanted to say, hey, I would like to send him a thank you for coming on Maker's Bar, or I had a question for him, somewhere along those lines, what's the best avenue for people to be able to reach out to you?
Yeah, it's probably email. And I'll tell you, rather than read my email address, if you just go on Google and write Steve Yeager, politician, or Steve Yeager, Nevada. There's a Steve Yeager baseball player, so he might come up, but that's not me. He's a little older. But yeah, I send email. You can also find me on all the social media platforms. I'm on Instagram. I'm on X. I'm on Blue Sky, Facebook. So not hard to find me. And yeah, reach out. It's always good to hear from people. And I'll say whether that's positive or negative, I invite it all. Like, we can always be better at what we do. So I would encourage folks to reach out and let me know what you thought of this particular interview, or if you have legislative ideas for things we should be doing here in the state. Would love to hear about that.
And thank you for that invitation, because I think that's one of the other things I wanted to leave our audience with, is that not only a method where they're able to reach you, but that you invite all of it, because I think that's also where we're going to bridge that gap, where we can invite the good and the bad, and then we can examine the information as we used to and come up with solutions together. And that is the goal. So thank you for that invitation for all of us.
You're welcome. Very welcome.
Absolutely. Representative Yeager, thank you again, good sir. I am looking forward to us speaking again and all the great things you're going to do. I'm looking forward to the bills that you have coming up as well. And I happen to have a relative living in Vegas. So
Okay.
don't feel surprised if I send you an email or a cell phone number text and say, hey, I'm down here. You got some time for us today.
Yeah, fantastic. I would enjoy that. Thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Representative. The speaker, Steve Yeager, thank you again. This is Maker's Bar, your guy, Seth Guru Baxter. Again, where we're creating 1 million leaders today for tomorrow. You've had one of those leaders on here give us a little bit of insight into his position and what he does and share his time with us. Please do know these are those opportunities where we're connecting to those leaders who are saying, I'm here to serve you. He's a prime example of what warmth and welcome and professionalism looks like with a smile. On behalf of Maker's Bar, the revolution that we're all looking for is the love-olution, a revolution of love. Let's do more of that today. This is your guy, Seth Guru Baxter, with House Speaker Steve Yeager. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. You take good care.
Okay. Thanks, you too.